Now, when we work on web designs, it is not as simple as the pages that we saw. There's going to be a huge number of styles, colors, properties, number of selectors. There could be element selectors, class, and ID selectors. Now, when it comes to that way, it might be a bit confusing at certain occasions. Let me show you an example here. Let's say we have a paragraph tag. I'm going to say this paragraph tag background color is red. What do you think happens? So all the para gets red, right? So there is one para inside this div and another para outside the div. So regardless of what, it means that all para gets this property. And let's say for this para, I'm going to say class equal to para1. And here I say para1 is background color blue. What do you think happens now? Blue takes place. Again, if I say id equal to para id1, here para id1, say background color could be green here. What do you think happens? It behaves in this way. Now, all these things considered, we have to think about another property, which is a universal selector. Say background color is black. Let me take this out. Everything is black now. So even the body's background color is black. But we just keep the paragraph here. So the paragraph alone gets a background color red. But then again, if we apply the class, this alone gets the blue color. Now if we apply the ID, it gets the property that is for the ID selector. Now I'll tell you how it works. Now when it comes to selectors, the universal property, assume that it has a property of, it has a value of 0 or a weightage of 0. Now when you think of an element selector, it has a weightage of 1. When you think of a class selector, it has a weightage of 10. When you think of a ID selector, it has a weightage of 100. And there is also inline styles, right? You could also apply style inline. Background color is white. See, the background color is white now. I'll tell you what happens here. So inline color, inline, let's say it's 1000. So this is very generic, which means apply this property to every other element, meaning the whole page, the whole body tag, the paragraph tag, div tags, apply this to every other element. So if I could even have something like font size, so which is applicable for every other element. So that's what it does. So it is very generic. Now, when you say there is a element selector, it becomes a little specific. So that is why I gave it a value of 1. When you have something like a class selector, it becomes even more specific, which becomes a value of 10. And then when you have a ID selector, it becomes very specific, which becomes a value of 100. And inline, it's like hard coded in the HTML itself. So it is more specific than any other selectors. Now what happens is, you could say city is red, or you could say New York is black. Now, when you say that, just think of it. I mean, how specific it is. When you just say city is red, it just means all cities are red. But when you say New York is black, the specific city is black. So it becomes specific, right? So we'll see how specific this becomes. So this is for all the elements. So it is not specific at all. It's very general. So this takes precedence over this. So element selector has a value of 1, which is higher than 0. But we have so many paragraphs, right? Let's say I remove this all. We have like 2 paragraphs here. Let me for a moment disable this. We have 2 paragraphs here. Both the paragraphs will have the same effect. But when I say that this paragraph gets a class, now class has higher precedence or higher weightage. So whatever class value you see here, that is what is applied here. If you see, we have 2 paragraphs, which when the one with the paragraph property is pretty much applied to this, which doesn't has a class, but the one which has class, it gets the class property. Now, when we have something like ID, it becomes more specific, but just think of this. When you have paragraph, it is applicable to all the paragraphs, but when you have class, you could have this class to multiple. You could have like multiple paragraphs to write, or even for the div, you could just give it. See, I'm going to give this to a heading. What happens? See? So here I said para 1 background color is blue, which is a style. Now these two take it, right? So this is more specific, meaning when you give something like class, it is applicable only to those paragraphs or those elements where you give a class, but you could give it to multiple elements. But when you have something like an ID, now ID is more specific, meaning you can't use this ID to another element. Now in that case, ID takes more precedence. So ID selectors property is what is being applied here. Okay, so just think of it. I mean, it is very common sense. It is very logical, right? So the more specific it is, the more precedency or weightage it gets. So specificity is what we call here. And again, there is the inline style. So inline style is more specific now. Inline style has more values. But the best way to use these selectors, I mean, I would always recommend to go for the class selector. Definitely not inline selector. Because when you have inline selector, I mean, when you just hard code it here, it is really tough. I mean, no matter if I change it here, no matter how I change it here, I won't be able to override this value. So this, let's say tomorrow in the future, in the maintenance phase, I want to change the background color to blue. I won't be able to do that from here. I have to change it in the inline style. Now you might be wondering, oh, what's wrong with that? I mean, you could simply go and change it in inline style, right? But think of it. This blue color, this background color, the very reason we have an external file is wherever we are using this class, all gets this color. But if you have this inline, I have to go through all the HTML file and change it. So it is not a very efficient way of coding your HTML CSS files. Okay, so there is a few combinations we could use these. Let's say this paragraph itself, you have like 2. So let me disable this now. here, what do you think will get applied? Blue is what will be applied. Okay, there's an inline style here. That's what has been applied here. Okay, so blue is what is applied. The reason being, if both are like same selectors, and if the properties are same, the property that comes next will be overridden. But see, the font size applies, meaning this font size won't be overridden by this properties because there's no font size mentioned here. But if there was a font size mentioned here, like this, obviously that lower, right? Now we can actually use these selectors in a like few different ways. I'll show you how. So we have a paragraph tag inside a div tag. Let me give this one some ID. I could say div and then hash div1, meaning all the divs, but only this ID will get this property. At the same time, I could also say see what happens. Now let's just focus here because the paragraph obviously will get the paragraphs style, right? So blue is what it got. Now these are all like two properties. This div1 says that apply this property to this div. So this is an ID selector, right? But adding this here, it makes it more specific, like it is adding more information to it. Now, okay, I mean, I just named it div1. Let's name this element1 so that it gives you more clarity. Now, when I just say element1, it's like saying any element. It could be any element, right? This property being applied on any element. But when I say div element1, it looks for all div. Within the div, this element1 is applied. So this, if you think of it, you can add these values. So element1, which is this is a class, right? So this has a weightage of 10. But here it has a weightage of 10 plus 1. So you can add this. So this is basically a logical calculation you could do in your mind. So this is 11. So this becomes more specific than this element. So whenever you have like a combination of elements being added like this, or let's say there is a class, just name it class 1. The same thing happens, right? So this is more specific than this, and this adds more weightage. So when you have like multiple selectors being combined, you actually add more weightage to it. And the same class, let's say if I have it in the style tag above, then it will add even more value to it. So the same class, if I copy this here, so whatever I enter here, that's what will take precedence or weightage. So use these selectors wisely. never use this. I don't think this will be used apart from a few conditions like say font and something that comes very universal. And never use inline, because the moment you use inline you can never change or override the values that you have mentioned in your inline. So it is always a very good practice to avoid inline and try to stick with these three selectors and class selectors predominantly. So if you are using combinations, always remember that you have to try to add these values to your combinations to see what the specificity or the weightage which will be applied to your elements.